Chapter 1, Books Before Boys. Where's Anika? Somewhere reading was one of the most likely responses during my childhood days in Birmingham, Alabama in the 1980s. Although I enjoyed riding my bike, watching television, and spending times with my sisters, Anthonita and Abra, reading was nonetheless my favorite pastime. As a result, I looked forward to walking to the library with my mother and sisters, and I eagerly participated when it was time for the library's summer reading clubs. I took my time and perused the countless books on the shelves, and I felt privileged when I left the library with an armload of books. After I read the books, I usually shared what I learned with anybody who would listen. In middle school, I still enjoyed reading and learning and excelled in most of my classes. I was also well liked by most of my teachers and many of the students. However, I wore glasses and was a little overweight, so a few classmates who struggled academically and got in trouble with the teachers frequently teased me and called me a nerd. However, I continued to read and do my best in school. The teasing and name-calling eventually ended when I was accepted into a high school for gifted, talented, and creative students where studious behavior was no longer laughed at, but encouraged. Since I enjoyed learning, I considered becoming a doctor or a dentist when I was in elementary school. However, during my high school years, my increasing dislike of seeing blood made both of these career choices unrealistic for me, so I decided to become a teacher. As a teacher, I can make a difference in the world by nurturing my students and helping them enjoy learning like I enjoyed it. In order to prepare for my career as a teacher, I started babysitting and attending classes for future teachers at a local university. I also worked at an after-school care program during the school year and at a day camp during the summer. Around this same time, my maternal grandmother, Grandma Woods, accepted a job as a librarian not too far from my high school. Now I had even more reasons to spend time at the library. During our visits, Grandma Woods and I enjoyed talking, eating, laughing, and working together. I sorted books, answered the phone, and worked at the circulation desk. I also helped her when she led out with programs for children and adults. Whenever you saw Grandma Woods, she usually had two buttons fastened to her clothes. One said, "Pray until something happens." The other one said, "Those who read succeed." She instilled these and many other important principles in my life as we spent time together. The Lord used these principles to give me a strong foundation. I would need to stand on this foundation when my life started falling apart in my early 20s. Grandma Woods and I maintained a close relationship until she passed away in the spring of 2009. I was teased so much by the boys in middle school that I was caught off guard when the boys in high school started expressing interest in me. On the other hand, my father knew this day would come, and he was ready. Not only did my father boast of how he would deal with any boy that dared to ask me on a date, but he also started drilling what seemed to be his favorite motto into my head: books before boys. It wasn't too difficult for me to comply with my father's orders because I was surrounded by other students who were serious about their studies. However, other problems arose. My classmates studied hard, but several of them also partied hard. Monday mornings often brought stories of their weekend alcohol and drug use and promiscuous activity. Although I enjoyed spending time with my classmates on the weekends, the Lord mercifully preserved me and kept me out of a great deal of trouble. Thou art my hiding place. Thou shalt preserve me from trouble. Psalms 32:7. My mustard seed-sized faith in God and His Word and my relationship with my parents served as anchors for me during my high school years. God used the Bible story of Daniel and his 3 friends to keep me away from alcohol and drugs. In like manner, He used the instructive words of my father and the chaste example of my mother to stir me away from promiscuity. I heeded the advice of my parents and focused my attention on my studies. Consequently, I graduated with honors from high school and received a full 4-year scholarship to a university about an hour away from my home. I majored in early childhood and elementary education and again excelled in my studies. I attended classes and studied during the week, but I usually headed back to Birmingham on the weekends in order to attend worship services and spend time with my family. During my first year of college, my parents divorced. However, my father didn't want the lives of his beloved daughters to be further disrupted. As a result, he continued to pay the mortgage on our family home, even though he moved out and started renting an apartment near his real estate office. My sisters and I missed having our father at home, but he continued to have an active role in our lives. The divorce was especially difficult for my mother. However, instead of throwing a pity party for herself, she decided to focus her attention on helping others. She volunteered in the community and planned special events for senior citizens. Instead of complaining about her situation, she decided to count her blessings. Our large home was one of my mother's blessings, and the Lord impressed her to use our home to be a blessing to others. After church, my mother invited people to join us at our home for lunch. She focused her attention on young adults, singles, and senior citizens who would likely leave church and return to an empty dorm room, apartment, or house. As a result, we often had guests in our home. Oftentimes when guests joined us for lunch, they felt comfortable and in turn invited other guests. Such was the case with Mark. When Mark moved to the area from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, my mother gave him a warm welcome and an invitation to join us for lunch. Mark was a regular guest in our home, and one bright spring afternoon in 1998, he brought a handsome new guy named Brent Chrishon with him. I was leaving the house headed to an afternoon program at church when Mark and Brent arrived. We briefly greeted each other on the sidewalk, but Brent and I enjoyed a more formal introduction later that evening when several of the young people from church met at Mark's apartment. I was interested in learning more about this young man who showed up at my house. I had many questions. Who was he? Was he married? Where was he from? What brought him to Birmingham? Would he be here short-term or long-term? As Brent and I talked, I discovered the answers to my questions. It turned out that Brent was unmarried and had moved to the area from Baton Rouge, Louisiana for a new sales job. A year prior to our meeting, an acquaintance had shared some life-changing information with him that led to him to do some research at a local library. As a result of his findings at the library, he had begun studying his Bible and eventually had found a church that believed the truths he had discovered during his personal study. Brent met and befriended Jeff, Mark's brother, while attending that church and was baptized at the end of the church's evangelistic meetings. When Jeff heard that Brent would be moving to Birmingham, he asked Mark to look out for him. And that's exactly what Mark did. He looked out for Brent and brought him to my home for lunch the very week he moved to town. Since Brent was new to the area, I volunteered to help him learn his way around town. My 2-year-old nephew, Anthony, often joined us for our adventures around the city. The three of us had great fun as we visited parks, historical landmarks, museums, and other tourist attractions. On other occasions, the two of us ate at restaurants and attended family gatherings and special events together. Brent and I enjoyed each other's company and spent a lot of time together. Over time, we became best friends. One morning while we were sitting next to each other in church, Brent looked at me and heard a still small voice say, "This is your wife." Brent liked the words he heard. After he secured permission from my parents, he proposed to me. I gladly accepted, and right away we began planning our wedding. We talked to our pastor about our marriage plans and enrolled in his premarital counseling sessions. Then I focused my attention on our wedding ceremony, our clothes, decorations, and food. I wanted everything to be just right. Brent and I loved each other and were making plans to get married, but I still remembered my father's counsel to choose books over boys. Therefore, I didn't allow our relationship to interfere with my education. With God's help, I graduated magna cum laude in May 1999 and landed my dream job as a 4th grade language arts teacher in the summer of 1999. I thought I was wise and ready for the world, but I was neither one. I still lacked heavenly wisdom that comes from above.